Mahwea ke jata ahitua ya kaya pia Dakota ke ot kaya pitka ahitua ya kaya pia Dakota ke Iapi ke oh I see he takuya pia Wicohan taka tipi gekta Dakota ke okina shimteya Dakota ke Iapi ke oh I see he takuya pia Wicohan taka tipi gekta Dakota ke okina shimteya
Dakota traditions tell of the creation of the Dakota people in their homeland of Minnesota eons ago. For hundreds of years after the arrival of Europeans in North America, the Dakota people continued to live and prosper in many communities on the upper Mississippi and Minnesota rivers. Through treaties signed in the 19th century, the Dakota ceded land to the U.S. government but continued to live on reservations on the Minnesota River into the early 1860s.
I think this language here is spiritual. I think God gave you the talent. I used to go to Harriet's place down here, and Elsie and them up there, and Bessie and them, and Josephine. And I noticed that especially Harriet and them, they were so happy when they got together to talk Indian. It seemed like it relieved them of something. And it made them so happy. So I'd sit there and listen. There was no English language. It was all Indian.
was Dakota only border copy. Het section het aan het mission almost spare. Aya takomni mish takuji Mexico ha. Tata Mexico ta oh ni sin Dakota oh ni border copy.
Growing up here in Granite, from the time we were little, everybody spoke Dakota. The whole community, I think, majority of people spoke Dakota. And growing up as a child here, I can remember my parents, great-grandparents, we all lived together, and it was so nice. We lived down by the river, the Minnesota River there, and all I can remember is the quietness of their voices. That's the one thing that sticks in my mind. Hearing Dakota all the time was just so comforting.
Everybody talked Dakota. I couldn't talk English when I started school. And of course, we didn't have no kindergarten. Buses didn't have kindergarten kids. Of course, we didn't have no car. And if I wanted to go to kindergarten, I suppose I'd have to walk. At that time, we lived about 4 miles from town. So we Indian boys kind of started late.
I would say when I was a little boy, I think I would say that about 90% of the people on the hill spoke Dakota. Just about everybody. The only ones that never spoke were the kids, the littles. And even some of those were still pretty good then, too.
My grandmother and grandfather brought us up. My dad would come and see us once in a while, but my grandma and grandpa was our mother and father. And they spoke the Dakota language all the time. I very ever seldom heard them speak any English. So we understood it when we were little, but as growing up, we weren't allowed to talk it in school, so we eventually forgot it. I can understand some of the language yet, but not all of it.
When I was growing up, my family, my mother and dad spoke the language. And they used to talk to, themselves, and they talked. And I caught on to their language, and I didn't know English. When I went to school, I had a hard time.
Then ook in de Wicohan en zitten sta first grade heb je nupach het samen. That means I flunked first grade. Se on niin da kotia muuta kapina kahta koda missä oto wakahne kesniä. Na sumit ha okene haasne no sutana se okene.
I think the best thing I enjoyed more of Grandma and Grandpa's, they would take us to powwows. Even if it was just us, they would take us to different towns, and Grandpa would sing and we would dance. Us kids would dance. We took second place at a float. We rode a float. That was nice.
And then we'd get in the wagon, and we had said, we're going on a big trip. Where are you going? We're going Redwood Falls. We go Redwood Falls in a team of horses and tie up the horses, and then we stay overnight. But I was a little kid like that, small little boy. I just barely learned to walk, and here I was dancing. So they used to take us to the fair, and we were dancing real hard for ourselves. And here they was throwing money out there. My grandpa and grandma were getting all the money. We didn't get nothing. We didn't know what's going on. So them things are, I laugh at them nowadays when I hear it.
I had another aunt. She lived in Pipestone. We went to visit, and of course, I playing outside with all my cousins on there. Just really tired when I come in, and we only had a 2-room house or something, just a bedroom and the kind of living room. Ma slept. She slept on the couch, and of course, we kids slept on the floor, which is fine. I wasn't. And I remember that night hearing. It's like there was boxes or something. Somebody was messing with boxes.
Oh, were you there then?
Yeah.
Oh,
and I went to sleep.
That was a ghost.
Yeah, I went to sleep, and because I was so tired from playing. But the next day, my mom asked Bob Wilson, what was going on last night? And of course, Bob, he only talks Dakota, so he says, ho ho ho, wanake, wanakichta. Kind of means like, wanake. I always used to hear wanake when I was young. It always means kind of again. The implication was that the ghost was doing his thing again. It was, in other words, it wasn't an isolated time. And I don't know if I'm translating this right, but every time I used to hear wanake a lot when I was young. Wanake this, wanake that, and it was always. It was
next.
Yeah, it was like wanake. What did he do now? It was always seemed to be. It seemed to be something negative. It was never Wanake. Somebody else did something good. It was always Wanake. Wanake. He said, got DWI again, Wanake, or something.
When people used to come around and visit each other on the gravel road, you can hear them in Nahum out there. You know, you can hear them on the gravel road coming. And some kids will run ahead and they see who it is. And if they're Indians coming, go get churro, there's Indians coming.
We played games. We played games like in the winter, I think it was more like card games, Parcheesi. And then when we go to a community thing, even the grown-ups, like when we'd go to Prairie Island, we'd play games, even the grown-ups, and we'd like in this big hall, they had these big benches, there'd be 4 of them, and they all sat all around, and they tied up this piece of cloth into a ball, and so we threw that, and that was one of our games.
I'll tell you this one story when I was a young guy. My grandfather and I were walking up the road there should be a store up there where Amos Owens lives, and or did live, I should say. And anyway, we used to go up there and get kerosene for our lamps, you know. So one day we were headed up that way, and right outside there, a guy named Harry Whipple was alive then. And he seen us walking up the road. He was eating something, you know. And he says, Solomon, huh? He says, go out, Dakota Chichiaki, you know. He said, tell you something, he says. Maishte, Washichuki Obumayapi, he says, you know. They amaze me. So the man here says, Dakota, you out there, ice cream, application. Huh? I took it to copy. Mr. Weiss is what's that? Says, you know. And so he says, and I show Bubaka, Chaka Geta, Ihidi, Chuba, that carp, ice cream is, he don't cream was for that. Ice, so he took the grease from the ice, he says. Remember things like that. This is the story I heard from my aunt. You know, they had a little cradle board or whatever that is. They put me up there in a tree, and then they were making blankets. And here the blue jays kept diving down on me, you know, when I was up there. And they didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on. So my grandma told my grandpa, you better go over there and see what's going on over there. These birds are diving down on him. So when he walked over there, there was a bull snake crawling up there. He was trying to get in my cradle. He heard the blue jays were diving down and knocked him off of that tree. So then they called me Blue Jay after that for a long time. Yeah, so you know, that's one story that I always think that's interesting myself.
Well, we grew up in an Indian language home, though. Our parents spoke Indian right along, and when we were real young, we sure didn't forget the commands, like when you learn to be quiet. If we went to meetings or if we went to things, we could just look at them and we know what they sit there and be quiet. But we learned without them raising their voice, without them hollering at us. They could just look at us or raise their hand or something, and we already knew what they meant. And part of that is the Indian language. The language is so different that when they say something to you, like when they even say your name in Indian, then you could feel the love, you could feel the kindness that goes behind it.
The 1862 is a pivotal year both in terms of facts and then in terms of story. And because that's when the conflict of 1862, the Dakota War, wherever you sit on the spectrum of what it was called, that it was a pivotal, earth-shaking thing in the lives of all kinds of people.
The devastating events of 1862 U.S.-Dakota War changed things forever. As a result of 1862, the U.S. government renounced Dakota treaties and the Dakota were exiled from Minnesota to reservations in Nebraska and South Dakota. Only a few Dakota were allowed to remain in Minnesota. During the 1870s and the 1880s, the exiled Dakota began to return to Minnesota to rejoin their relatives. Federal appropriations led to the purchase of land at Morton, Granite Falls, Prior Lake, Prairie Island, and Wabasha. In some cases, the decision to buy lands at these places were made because Dakota people had already bought small pieces of land there.
Growing up, they always talked about 1862, the things that happened there, and I remember the stories of the forced march. I grew up hearing those stories. The elders would talk about those things. The forced march to Fort Snelling, the hanging. And so I always knew that, but I never could find out in the history books. It's like nobody knew outside our family. And so my mom used to tell us, and maybe she wanted to make sure we never forgot about what happened to our relatives. We've lost people on that march. And so that's always been a memory in our family. And so I always told my kids have been raised on those stories, and made sure that they never forgot what happened to our people here in Minnesota.
And the journey, depending on who and what facts you want to look at, the people went from here on a march. The march split down by south of New Ulm a little ways, and the people, the women and children and old men went to Fort Snelling, or what's below Fort Snelling, to the prison camp, and the men were marched then down to the prison camp in Mankato, which ultimately ended up in the riverboats taking the people from Fort Snelling in the spring of 1863 to Crow Creek in what is now South Dakota. And the men in the prison camp ended up either being hung on December 26, 1862, or those that didn't get hung ended up at the prison camp in Fort Davenport, Iowa.
Hokshipidag, Dakota Hokshipidag, Dakota Winochkin Kevin. No na Katach Peap, Unkiapi. Nakuhe Wexu Yavanta Chantema Shichiga. Nasta Takrastodwasnitka. Inoche Iotara Ke Wexu Yavache Chantema Shichiche. No, Naku Chanzema Piche, you know.
It seems Tota Washington, this Makochi, he honey. Heta sita kwashi stream ke o niunk therapy. Ta kusta o niunk therapy. Sena yo kakhne kapi. Kaya Dakota hana nunko kakhne kapshini. Da hatu stana ko he. O niunk therapy. Da hatu stana ko. O niunk therapy. Do ka kumshkamsta. Ichina ye won't speak up ana ye won't speak hena ye karapi. Ukhsha hena ye ukakhne kapi. Okay, we nam karapshini. Karapshini on tamuni taya am ko kakhne kapdishni.
Yeah, my grandma used to talk about it. But then she said, Dakishni, don't say anything, don't tell anybody. If you tell them, they'll put you in jail. Or accept it, or they'll kill you. Yeah. I listened and I never repeated because of what she said. She said the government officials find out, she said, they'll do away with you.
An agency was established at Birch Coulee, now called Morton, as well as a day school for Indian students. In 1891, a federal appropriation established a day school, which opened its doors at Pipestone 2 years later. The school was intended for all tribes in the United States. In later years, the Dakota students were far outnumbered by students from other tribes. But within a few years of opening of the school, the superintendent took over the duties as Indian agent for Dakota and Minnesota.
My mom and dad spoke the language, but it was always when they didn't want us to know, those stories. So I remember little, I thought, well, gee, this must be bad or something that they don't want us to learn this. And now I realize why. They both went to boarding schools, and that's why that was.
While the Pipestone Agency and school were intended to improve the welfare of the Dakota by giving them improved housing, medical care, food, and income, these benefits disguised the pressure on Dakota people to abandon their traditional culture and their Dakota language. The goal of the school and other government schools where Dakota children were sent was to teach them subjects that would prepare them for getting jobs in the American economy, on farms, in cities, and in factories. Continuing to speak the Dakota language was not encouraged, although some Dakota children who attended Pipestone and other government schools still spoke Dakota with their parents and grandparents in their homes.
Pipestone, Minnesota. School of Hanawa, you dabbed the Mike Kika and Co up here, Cookshira picking. He taku ruler, taku hair copy. He no na mampipu chet. Tohan Dakota Wawa hadake wa chinka. Hetched unskampi chan. Hetched he taku nan Dakota Hanai Waha dakap snitched. He on ruler king. Taku he copy king. He Hana a mampipu chet. Unkia mampipi. So had you have Exuya volunteered?
No, to Flanders, Indian school. But it's altogether a different atmosphere, different setting, different everything. Yeah, they're all Indians. Of course, there's different kinds of Indians, but but they're all Indians. No Washichus.
Do I the talk guy? At school you have my use up in your kipsnit. Na stogi bdabe chair, taku kana. Hey, bdabe chair. I don't know school or Hanawa unsnit. But in Morton, Tawaiga, had Unkana me talking. They talk on Kichu picking. Yachuk that car. Hetched ni kuapke ha. Taku un chumpikin. Washtega ish washteshni. Ka ni pepigan ya umpikan head. Shichach chege. Dakota gun taku do ge chumo keepsni.
I took care of the social services, Indian Child Welfare Act. I had to go to courts with the kids' parents. over the system, see that they're all enrolled members before you can help them. Sometimes you have to be an enrolled member, and you got to be so much Indian. So I had to go by those rules.
I was sent to school with my sister. They were given some homework and some books and stuff to read. And we started to talk English in the house. My dad forbid us to talk English because he said, your mother don't understand, your grandma don't understand. People are coming to visit, they don't understand what you're talking about. So it was confusing at age because of trying to talk English and try to talk Indian. And the same thing was happening at school. Couldn't talk Indian in school, and then you couldn't talk Indian at home. So it was confusing for me, And I finally told my dad, I said, what are we supposed to be talking, He said, well, around home you talk Indian.
Dakota Iapi Chera almost split. Wayawa ibdabreke enina tehike. Uspeki hena tako ye hesto wyatt. Kahe. Na pede hena tehia wakua hena. I shoot you up in your head. I wake you. Dakota up your head. A pet. And Nina chance. And that's your hinaji here. So heady man out here. And the pet that's your. But do it. Chawa, maza het taku. Akanya. Yeah. We don't speak that devil's language here. We speak English. And then, yeah, akan amape. Nina ksumayam.
Dakota Iapi ki he ito due tawachi eki hinakega gihan nina unach umwashte je Dakota Iapi ka Dakota odoa hena Dakota oyate tawab hena doamp giha nina unach umwashte Kawoche ki eab hena naku. Ito hena no wonspek hua. Hena unspep chagahan. Uma naka ichaga ub hena unspep kiha. Dakota Iapi ki he toshta katina yekta mishhechen. Mitawa chinka he ohne he wana washkan wachin to haya owaki kiha.
One night I was praying, they asked me what I want because I'm always praying for Indians. And I was told that Indians forgot how to love. And I really felt bad and I said, that can't be. And here it is. We forgot our way of life, the way we were taught. It was born right into us just like the color of our skin. We have to get back to it, I think. And language is a part of it, a big part, because even when they speak, you can feel the difference. When Indians stand up and speak, when they pray, there's a way difference from just saying a prayer from a piece of paper or something. They speak from their heart.
In the 1930s, Dakota communities were encouraged because of the passage of the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act to organize with their own constitutions and governing councils, increasing the number of decisions they could make about their own lives. However, because of the previous federal land purchases, Dakota were not allowed to organize as a single people, but instead as small separate communities at Upper Sioux, Pajutá ZZ, Lower Sioux, Teunhindapi, Prairie Island, Teunhindapi, and later Shakopee, Bede Mayato in 1969.
Hetanaka he on week dana he o kene washijo etkia taku wonspe na Hawaii kapkon washtek apche. Echenta she no mkishnach toni no mkishnach toni was inach maska cheta ho unhoptishni. Echenta she dana maza sky che uno chtoni pi. Kahechela ukiyu tampi.
I remember my dad specifically, when I got older and a teenager, going through all the angst and the weirdness of teenagers, is that we would get into arguments and fights and things, as all teenagers do. I don't want to make it sound like I was knocked out. Those kind of fights, but the testing of wills kind of stuff. And I was talking to my dad and I said, somehow we got going, and I said, well, how come we never learn the language, and stuff like that. And he said, I made a decision after my experiences that you kids would never learn the language. And part of the reason why I raised you here, because we were fighting over all kind of, why I was raised here and why I couldn't go to boarding school and stuff like that. He said, the reason why I raised you here so you'd never have to do that.
Yeah, I think it was way different when we were little. Then they didn't want us to speak it, then we just had to speak English.
Did they ever say why they didn't talk
No.
Dakota?
No, I never remember anybody telling us why we couldn't speak Indian, but...
They didn't at the time, but later on they explained that, yeah, it was because they were punished. They didn't want us, to be punished that way for speaking the language.
No, mish Pajutá ZZ Iapi hichia wa I herhan when you do akema zapta herhan hichia wa I dekshiwa e happy. Nako hichia wa herhan Dakota Iapi nawachu. Da wichashta numpa Dakota wohedakapi. Unka he daku he. Atewe imuhe. Atewe omake ake he Dakota Iapi. Oha he on spemi chichi awachin. On spema yake oyaki he. Atewe amayopte hia owaki ishni. Mijami chingshi homakshile heahan inawaye he imuhe. Dakota on spema yake ekta. Ina kunshiwaye kunku hia owaki ishni washichupiki hena he chimpshni washichon kiapikta chimpi oni washtikte he chanukahan.
Despite being given the right to reorganize their communities, the forces of change have continued to pressure them in ways that encourage the abandonment of traditional culture, beliefs, and language. In the 1950s, the Minnesota Dakota, like many other tribes, were encouraged by the Relocation Act of 1956 and forced by economic pressures to leave their communities and get jobs in the cities. One ray of hope for Dakota traditions was the work begun by Dakota speakers in 1969 at the University of Minnesota to preserve and teach the Dakota language.
Minnesota won't be wakanti atipi. Yed he tokahea ikche wichashta oyake yuhapki he omaka opawenge akenap chiwanka some wikchemina shakbe some nap chiwanka he 1969 he tahano Dakota ka hahatoa. Iapi ki he yu hashkampi. He re taha tokaheach. Imawaga ka he chamu o akihi.
By your very presence being here shows that you have demonstrated an interest, an invested interest in learning the language or promoting the language use in our communities, in our homes, in our families. And so we kind of wanted to have a discussion.
Ohni ang petu iohi mish. Imani ha jet. Taniwa iki ha. Imani hanga iomak piche de Dakota Iapiki. Daya yu haunshkampi ka. Tena wonspekwa washichunga Dakota. Ka oyate tok tokcha Dakota yav hede unspepi chimpi na ka. Unspewi chomki api.
Family history, Project Waji Echamo. Heha mi sapa mi hunka ke titoka wai cha daku muhe iwicha muhe wachin. Heha Ogana Wayega, Mushi Wayeg, Hena Makia Kapi. Iapi Wanji Unyu Happy. Dakota Iapi. Won Hedakapi. Iapi. Hedanha. Iapi Kinde was Pemichi watching.
Oha. Ako tehan he ibadukcha. Unka wania tu wikshemina num sam mazapta hehan dead wabadao. Onspekwa hemacha hehan Dakota Iapi unspemi chiche. Wania tu numpa dead washkan. Unka Dakota Iapi he nina tewachinde. He on tehan unspemi chiche. Wanade wania tu ake zapta ched. Dakota Iapi he unspemi chiche.
Wita ta Africa ha hokanino washije cheta ha proud. Hena Dakota cheta ha wani hena. Ishi chetu wena daku rino. Washekhi heka. Nina wita tando.
Dakota Iapi unspe ichichiapo. Iapi kinde unspe ni chichiapi. Yaha sto ni chichiapi kte. Danikota cha Iapi kinde unspe ichichiapo.
And this language is important, it's really important, but I always kind of feel like it's really kind of too late for me. Not, since Mom died, I don't hear it, and so I can't. So when I do hear it, it takes me a while to kind of figure out. I can understand that part. Some of it I know that, and some of it I don't know, but I don't remember. And we must have known more when we were young. But I don't remember, and it just, so the language is going to have to be taken up by someone, younger than I am.
Iminishka, St. Paul headed there. Wopewatunka, de Mazopi get Otohania. She checked one. Yeah, we are one head there. But Hepa. Dokia ohe, dechiku. Ohenawach unka o. Detue de Dakota. Dakota we want dead on epche. Ochitako de opewa to itoga shewaki na to wiang he. Dokieta ho ug he headgear ibidabade. What the wiang ye waya. Akehe. Oh, hepa. Toki dada he.
she don't head it, she walk again. Oh, she double go. A chatted Diana Dakota Iapi, Unach Washte a pep. Dakota Iapi ki head, Unachu Washtet ka, Ohni na Wachuchni a pound kae. Hea shake, we koshka ke. Ihaga hair. Ha, head and I geshte down caught up in a car and I de she chechak Dakota Iapi. Ohni uspewi chonk Iapi air. Oh, hewa stay pe. Hede na chich una ka head o chidek yechieg hewa sted het akuda no ishekarichi awa chinshit ka he totu hede tokia Dakota Yauka hekchi wah daka wachin. No, it an shitok chashne misha Dakota Iapi ki he hewa ste wakidaka yested. That was in a Target store in St. Paul.
I think when we were little, you almost didn't want to be an Indian. As soon as you got to school, you were a savage, a little Indian getting beat and hit and standing in the hall, getting our hands hit and on this side and in the back. But you didn't even want to be an Indian. You thought it was something bad or something wrong with you. As you get older and learn the history and stuff, that's where we have to come back. We have to remember that we're brown, we're Indian, we're never going to change. That's us. So we have to wake up and remember who we are. We're Indian. We have to be proud to be an Indian and learn the language, and that's what's going to help us the most. To speak our language, then we are who we are.
Well, Teunhindapi to Dona Kunshiwaketwa, we dago and she we chose on Teunhindapi. Na go he Washichu ish ni Dakota ye, we chose on Teunhindapi. Na go he kokach negabi koki hippie.
That's where my thoughts are with the younger generation. I have great-grandchildren now, and I want them to know always who they are. And they're from different tribes too, but, you know, we are all one people.
Bringing the language back. What are some things that you would want us to know about doing that?
Well, you gotta talk Indian all the time.
Yeah.
To your family.
I think the language is, it never should have stopped the learning, but then you got to remember how many generations that didn't speak in the house. The language itself, I don't think it'll ever go away. But people are, you know, for a long time, those people didn't want to learn.
My first language is Dakota, and my second language is Washichu, and that's the way it's been all my life. And I was born when we used nothing but the Dakota language in the home, but we had to learn when we went to the white school, but it was easy to learn because it was a sense of survival to be able to speak Washichu. And we are survivors. Dakota people are, Native people are survivors.
Dakota Wicohan is a Minnesota nonprofit with a mission to revive the Dakota language and pass it on to future generations. Our goal is intergenerational learning, especially within family nests. 10 years ago, members of the communities got together and shared our concern for the loss of the Dakota language, especially among our fluent elders. So we started meeting in our homes, in the communities, and decided to form a nonprofit
to do that work of Dakota language revitalization.
That's a way option,
Just do what you can to learn your language. And then share it with somebody. Don't just learn it, you gotta share it with somebody.
When people are learning the Dakota language, have compassion for them, and I guess I won't say pity them, but the Dakota word means more of if you want to help them and nurture them, so that as they learn the Dakota language, they don't, that spirit of wanting to learn isn't snuffed out. Because so often, the language was beaten out of our elders. So today, in this day and age, a lot of elders are afraid to speak because they were probably raised or went to boarding schools where they were beaten if they spoke their language. So that generation of our elders are still struggling. So as we try to relearn our language, and as our children, grandchildren relearn the language, just have compassion for each other as we learn.
First thing you got to understand about the language, there's no right or wrong in it. No matter how you say whatever words, that's how you know it. Where you grew up, that's probably how you learned from your parents or the community or whatever.
They took me to a family household, and they're young people. And they spoke Dakota in the house, and even the children. Yeah. So it was good to hear that. That the children are learning too. Little tiny babies. They speak Dakota to them.
Kud Iaha. Shinchaka Kud Iaha.
What do you think about the younger generation trying to, learn it now?
Yeah. I think that's really a great thing, especially with the people that already have learned it. That if they do it within the household, boy, that's a good way to learn. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Be compassionate, because there's a lot of learners out there, and they want to know what's Dakota, who is Dakota, and we need to help each other and treat each other well, and not discourage each other from learning.
And don't give up either. Sometimes elders have said, "Oh, you sound like a Washichu person speaking Dakota." They've said that to me. So you kind of have to have some thick skin.
If it's some way going to be an advantage to our younger generation, that's what I want to see. They will carry that language. It'll never be like it was 7,500 years ago. It will be close to that if we work all together, everyone work together toward that goal. And I think it's something that Native people should look at.
Younger sister, Epazo.
Today, Dakota people, despite the challenges faced by their parents and grandparents to survive and preserve their traditions, Dakota people in many places are experiencing a cultural rebirth through remembering the past, reclaiming their place in the world, and reconnecting the circle of Dakota tradition.
You guys are really doing a good thing, because we have to keep our language alive. I mean, not just the Dakotas, but all of the nations that are losing their language. Because once we lose our language, we no longer exist as a nation. We are Dakota. And our children should be taught that.
who we were is what we want to try to get back to. And I think it's going in the right direction. And I do see it. I do see it in so many different ways that we are trying to help our younger people to be who they are. Damakota. You are saying something very great and honorable when you say, I am a Dakota.
Grandma, grandpa, cousin, brothers, sisters, everybody that somebody goes, okay. So I want you Indian people, the Dakota Pikahan, chantewa stea ompuo, okshiapia, he petuki, taku waste e chanokahan, nie ke taku waste, something good happened to you. Hatred had wakan, wo hadake. Oh, tama.
Tokashi